Let's do another masterclass on trauma and leadership. And as I've warned you in other videos, I don't use a structured approach. So there's no plan. And I don't do videos if it doesn't feel right. I've come to a point where I only do things that feel right. If there's something that doesn't flow, or I don't feel up to it, or it feels weird, or like it doesn't, like I have to push it, or I have to put like an effort into keep doing it, then that's the sign for me that it's not something I want to do. Yeah. So I've been wondering about how I would want to approach another masterclass. And I've written down a number of things that I think are interesting because maybe they're not talked about, or I don't know. Let's see. I'm just going to share these thoughts with you guys, and I hope that they're useful for some of you. Let me write just Chernobyl down because it's an interesting idea. So, a few concepts that I might have discussed them on the short videos. Timing. The timing of resolving trauma is very long. It's a lot longer than any profitable business approach in the sense that none of the providers that are coming to you saying, I will resolve your trauma, I will resolve this problem, I will fix this, I will fix that, they will probably not be around long enough to see you actually overcome and put that trauma behind you. That's interesting because the market of self-help tools and self-help coaches and books and videos and contents is amazingly predatory. I find this to be very inconsistent. Well, it's something that I don't do. I don't believe in it. And when I come across it, it puts me off because it's inconsistent. You're selling a spiritual peace. You're selling, I've overcome everything. I know what you need to do. And then every time I move on your website or click on something, I have to download your app. I have you selling me stuff in my face the whole time. You're like an abandoned baby screaming out for its mother, which tells me there's trauma to be resolved there. Um, Nobody has your solution for you. Nobody has it. Because if somebody else had your solution for you, then your life would be pointless. And that's an interesting thing to think about and to discuss, is that we're kind of operating with this shared fantasy that life is about becoming what people are showing on social networks, being rich, being successful, being pretty, attractive, having an attractive, pretty, or very hot boyfriend or girlfriend, eating the best foods, taking pictures of everything you eat, going to the best beaches. It's like we're compulsively seeking out the best stuff to showcase on our social networks and to show off about. And that would be a pretty pointless goal in life because there's always going to be something shinier than what you just posted. And because the concept of what is shinier, what is hot, what is better, it keeps changing all the time. That's what fashion is, yes? They're trends. And so at one point, the most fashionable or cool thing to be is to have long hair and to be walking around with bell-bottom trousers. And then the next year, the coolest thing to be is to be wearing some kind of very short skirt. And the same thing happens with decoration and with boats and with even with religion. In Spain, the media are talking about this is Pushkin, who's asking for some lap time. Lap time, that doesn't sound right. Yes, he wants to be up on my lap. doesn't sound right because they turned that into a thing that doesn't sound right. But I was innocent about it, and there's nobody more innocent here than this little Pushko. Um, so really, a bit, one of the main purposes of life is, or the purpose of life is becoming more than you are. That's why we're here. We're here to expand who we are. And this is hard to think of for people who don't believe that there's any kind of God or divinity, that it all ends the day we die. And I respect those beliefs. I'm not here to change your beliefs, but I am here to ask questions and say, a life where you can look back and say, I overcame my limits. I faced my fears. I did stuff that was bigger than me. I didn't just think about tiny little me and, accumulating wealth and trying to make myself better. But no, I learned how to build stuff and impact other people's lives. And, I became more than I was. I think that's a life well lived. Um, in fact, all lives are well lived because unconsciously we are continuously working against the traumas that we're carrying. We are looking for the ways to resolve those traumas. One of the great teachers that I followed I did at least 10 years of training with different professors, and I saw Bert Hellinger several times, and I did attend several trainings with him when he came to Spain. Bert Hellinger, he came up with a tool called Family Constellations. It's a very interesting and powerful tool to help us move past our blocks, to see things we're not able to see on our own. You need to choose your provider carefully because it's a very powerful tool, but it's extended around the whole world. And Bert Hellinger used to say that, how free are we? And he said, well, we're free to choose whether we have fried eggs or boiled eggs for supper. That's about it. And I think that's very funny, but it's very close to the truth. When you realize, when you're working through trauma and you realize how many choices you made in your life and how many experiences you repeated, you weren't looking for them consciously, but you found yourself repeating the pattern over and over and over, you realize that somebody else was driving. I had that realization when I started my company. I started a consulting company in 2005, and I sold my apartment to fund it, and I raised capital, so I got other people to put in funding, and it was like a whirlwind adventure where I was trying to build, and it was falling apart faster than I could build it, and that lasted for about 3 years until I couldn't keep going because I couldn't get into more debt. It was impossible to keep going. Yeah. And for a couple of years after I closed everything down, I was trying to continue to work in the market, and I was well positioned because I'd invested a lot in communication. So, and I was working with very top level executives, the CEOs, with members of executive committees, with board members, and so I mean I it seemed like I was getting myself out of the hole of debt because when a business goes broke, there's a huge amount of debt and it all fell on my shoulders. Everybody else just left. And when the financial crisis arrived at the end of 2008, 2009, at the end of 2009, I went to see the president for South Europe of Siemens. And he's a very wise, very smart man. And he said to me, we've been interacting. I was trying to sell services in the company for about a year because when you're working at that level, The sales cycles are very, very long. And he liked me. He thought that I did bring value. But we met up and he said the Lehman Brothers crisis had exploded and the financial sector was just folding on itself everywhere in the world. And in Spain, we were feeling it very strongly at that time. And he said to me, um, I want to work with you. I think that what you do is very valuable, but I just changed the whole fleet of cars. I renovated the contracts for renting of all of our cars, and I got myself a cheaper car because these are times for less spending, and there's no way that I can justify investing in a service like the kind of service you offer, because the kind of service I was offering to, and I still offer to large companies, it's not a solution. It's not a key to open a door. It's an investment that will it will improve the way the company operates, but that doesn't mean that they're going to make more money. So sometimes I say to private clients when they start a contract, I do contracts of 6 sessions, and I usually have a conversation or a test session before they decide to commit to the program of 6 sessions. And I always say to them, I don't know if when we finish, you're going to be better off or worse off than you are now. And they find that funny. And I said, no, it's just I see a lot of processes. And sometimes people, they really start to invest, they really start to uncover the tough stuff. And they do such a good job of it that by the time we finish the 6 sessions, and that might take them 3 months or a year, depends on each client, by the time you're doing your 6th session, it might happen that your life takes a turn for the worse because you're ready to open worse or more difficult pockets of emotional pain. And so we need to experience circumstances and events that replicate the original trauma. Otherwise, we cannot feel or connect with the frozen emotions inside of us that happened at the original trauma. So, for example, if I, in my case, what I realized and what I understood after I spoke to this super executive and I said, "Oh, I totally understand. I would do the same thing you're doing. I wouldn't buy my services either in this context right now." I left there and I called my father and I put all of my stuff into storage and I moved back into my parents' house. And I remember walking the dogs, my parents' dogs, up and down the sidewalk of the street where I had grown up for a large part of my childhood, my from 13 to 20 something. And I had an enormous feeling of failure because I hadn't got married, I hadn't had kids. I was 30 something, 37 or 38. Um, and I had worked so hard and I was supposed to be so smart. I used to get the best grades at school. Um, what what happened? What did I do wrong? How could I be back where it all started with no money, no children, no husband, no nothing, right? And that is where I understood that there was another logic operating inside of me, that somebody else was driving the car, somebody else was driving my life. And that other intelligence, that was my unconscious mind, had a different agenda to my agenda. My agenda was a typical agenda. It was get married to the perfect husband, have the perfect house, have the perfect kids, and build the perfect life and be perfectly happy forever, like in the fairy tales. Poor innocent little me, I didn't know what was coming. And the point of all this is that no, we're not free, because if I had been free to choose, do you want to experience a business total failure and be back at your parents' house at 38 with nothing to show for yourself? I would never have chosen that. I got to choose boiled eggs or fried eggs for supper, but I did not get to choose that. There was another agenda fixed there. And that agenda was fixed by all of the traumas I had experienced and by my unconscious mind repeating events in order to resolve those traumas. And that was 2009. And we're in 2025. So this is, what is it, 15, 16 years later. And I have been working on layers and layers and layers of trauma all of this time. I have followed so many masters and teachers who I thought were going to solve the problem for me, and none of them solved the problem for me. Bert Hellinger is dead. Dr. Vercelli is still there, but I don't have contact with him. I haven't had contact with him for years. Um, and if I think of any of the other masters or people that I've worked with hoping to achieve something, well, they're gone from my life, and I'm still working on layers of the traumas that I brought. So all of this is the way I talk. It's just I open chapters and that brings me to something else, and sometimes I'm not very good at closing the chapters I opened. So if you get lost on something, you can leave a comment and ask what I forgot to say. But the idea is that resolving trauma is a long, long path. And as long as you have not resolved trauma, your brain is not operating the way you want it to. Your brain is operating the way your unconscious mind needs it to in order to resolve the trauma. Resolving hidden trauma is a number one priority for our unconscious mind. And our unconscious mind is that entire network of nerve cells that is everywhere in our bodies. It's in the points of our fingertips. It's everywhere, and it's working together as a system. We're like octopus, like octopi. Yes. We think that we have one brain here and that everything else is obeying what's in here, but that's not true. There is one universal brain, the autonomous nervous system. It's this whole network that's constantly moving and sharing information about what we need to survive. And once our autonomous nervous system is sure that we are safe, the next goal is to improve our pleasure, improve our quality of life, become better than we are. And the only way to do that is unburdening ourselves. It is resolving the traumas that we bring. Yeah. So in 2009, when my business went broke, when I found myself back at my parents with no money, no husband, no children, nothing to show for I don't know, the 20 years that had gone by, the 10 years I was an executive, and then all of the years I put into this company that went bust. That's when I understood, walking on that sidewalk, that there was another intelligence operating inside of me. And that intelligence doesn't care if I have fried eggs or boiled eggs for supper. It has one goal, and that goal is to resolve as much trauma as possible, as fast as possible. And that's very interesting when you're talking about the timing, because we're saying, oh, the timing of resolving trauma is very slow. But it is very slow because we are holding a whole lot of trauma. And we are holding on to all of the stuff that happened when we were kids because that is the map or the story or let's say, the language through which all of the family's previous trauma and previous generations came upon us. So if you look at families, each generation suffers a number of traumatic events, some more than others. And if they're not able to overcome that trauma gets passed on to the next generation. And that's why we call it multi-generational trauma, because we see patterns of alcoholism repeat in 7 generations of men, for example. And we've been able to see this thanks to strange experiments like putting all of the indigenous and the Native American Indians into reservations. And the fact that that was done in North America meant that we've been able to observe from the outside how 7 generations of men have problems with alcohol. The father, the grandfather, because we're looking at them from the outside, we're saying nothing's changed. Everything is, they're living in this kind of contained space. But there is horrible trauma because all of the stuff that we all did to put them into those reservations has left a lot of pain. Mm? And alcoholism and drug addiction and addiction in general, every kind of addiction, it's a compulsion where we're trying to escape from the emotional pain. And we can only stop repeating the compulsion when we learn how to deal with the emotional pain. The emotional pain is so unbearable that taking something as dangerous and as terrible as fentanyl looks like a good idea to the brain of somebody who has so much pain inside, they cannot bear it. And it's not even a decision that we make consciously. If it was a rational decision, then you could argue with a person like you're not thinking straight. But there's nothing rational about it. They don't even have time to think about it because their body is itching to escape from this horrible pile of hidden past traumatic emotion that they're holding. Yeah. So that is why addictions are so out of hand and they're so globalized everywhere. Fentanyl is going to get everywhere. It's already coming into Spain now. And we've all seen the effects of fentanyl on people. We see them in videos. They look like zombies. It's terrible, but this is where we are. And again, this is the kind of stuff we would never have chosen voluntarily. If we could have had a choice, if we could choose more than boiled eggs or fried eggs, if we could decide, I want to live a life of being addicted to fentanyl until I finally die, because fentanyl is terrible. It kills you very quickly compared to other less dangerous drugs that we had before. I would never choose that path voluntarily. Why do I go down that path? Because there's another intelligence operating inside of me, and that intelligence is our unconscious mind. Yeah, and our unconscious mind is trying to resolve trauma, and the way it resolves trauma is by repeating the same situation over and over again until we get it right. So sometimes you need to be like, for example, I was a bulimic for 30 years. My first memory of opening a box this size, like a big carton box full of biscuits that we used to buy when we lived in Mexico. My first memory of sitting in front of a box and just taking biscuits out of the box nonstop for I don't know how much time was when I was around 8 or 9, living in Mexico, in the north of Mexico. And that went on for 30 years. For 30 years, I fought with food. I fought with food. I didn't start vomiting what I had eaten until I was like in my early 20s because I didn't know how to do it. But from the age of 8 years old, I hated my body. I hated myself. I was addicted to food, so I was either controlling it and trying to avoid it, or I was giving into it and I couldn't stop myself from eating everything I could see. There was no limit. The only limit was the physical limit of being able to move, to contain, to keep living after I'd stuffed myself with everything I could see. And at the same time, when I was eating and I was hating myself. And there was nothing, I would never have chosen anything like that. Okay. My addiction receded. I finally overcame the bulimia the year I began to remember, 30 years later, that I had suffered sexual abuse at the hands of a friend of the family who stayed with us for 3 weeks in our house when we were living in Mexico. And I started to remember that when I was 38. And that's the year I stopped having bulimia. And I'd started doing therapy at 30. So I'd started doing therapy at 30 or 31. And I had been reading books and I had done all of the self-help I could do on my own before I was 31. And then when I was 31, I started doing therapy. And I did not remember until I was 38. And this was when I was back in my parents' house, when I had lost everything I had, when I was back walking that sidewalk with the dogs, with nothing to show for myself. And so that other intelligence that was driving my life, trying to build a business, try to make a name for myself, trying to succeed in the business world and bring coaching to companies and everything rational was more or less okay. I did an MBA before I started my business, and I applied everything I learned in the MBA. So I knew this. I did everything by the book. How did everything go so wrong? And I started looking at the people that I had clicked with, the people I had had chemistry with, the people I had employed, the people whose money I had taken, because I was able to, I found five people who were ready to fund my business, and I chose two of them. And that was very successful because everybody told me that was impossible. I would find nobody was ever going to put money into a consulting company because a consulting company doesn't have assets. And I would say, but my assets are my people, because I was thinking, well, I was 30 something, and I had done an MBA, and I had all of the reasonings to go forward with this, and I needed to do it, and I did it, right? But it all went wrong. But of the six employees I had, we had to, one of them, it turned out he'd lied about everything he told us before we were hiring him. So we had to get rid of him as soon as he came on board. And because we were a very small company, we had to give a percentage of equity to the senior people we were trying to bring into the business. So that was a whole terrible show to undo what we had just done. Big learning lesson. Oh my God, how could we have all got it so wrong? And it took us 2 or 3 weeks to understand that it was all, he'd faked the whole thing. Everything was lies. Everything he told us, he'd lied to all of us. But then there were two of my employees got terrible sicknesses. And thankfully they didn't do what most people would have done, which is to just take leave and have me paying the state for their salaries for months and months and months until they got better from chronic sicknesses. They weren't going to get that. That would have completely killed me economically, no? But it was amazing to me that I had selected all of my employees with a headhunter. We had done calligraphy analysis to look at personality because I was a coach, so I was into psychology and personality analysis, and I had outsourced all of these smart people to come in and say, these are the people that click with you, and these are the people that don't click with you. And the people that clicked with me, they spent all of my money. And I really, this is something that I understood years after that, but the thing that killed my company is that I repeated the same toxic dynamics that I had grown up with in my own family. And in my own family, because of all the trauma that we were carrying, because everybody in my family, they're all good people, but we were all carrying a lot of trauma. Um, we repeated games where we constantly criticized me, and I worked for everybody, and I gave everything I had, and I got nothing in return. And when I went out and started a company, I did exactly that. And the people I clicked with, the people who had good chemistry with me, who came out with the top scores in the calligraphy exams and in the headhunting recommendations, they had all the talent and the experience that we needed, but also they were very comfortable getting a lot more than they gave back. And I was very comfortable giving a lot more than I got back. And so that killed my baby. My company was my baby. So, you pass on to your kids if you have kids. If you don't have kids and you start a business, well, you pass it on to the business. And your business dies of malnutrition because there's no more resources. There's no more money coming in the door. Because every cent that comes in the door, you give it away to somebody who's not going to give back. You invest it on somebody who isn't thinking of you or isn't thinking of your company. They're thinking of their own stuff and what they can get from you. No. So I think that these stories illustrate to what extent trauma takes a long time, and trauma it makes you get into situations that replicate the original traumatic situation. And there's no freedom. There is no freedom to go against that. I mean, the only freedom you have is pushing it back in time. So you can escape, choosing easier roads or choosing safety or choosing a fixed salary. I remember the when I decided I was going to leave the company where I was working as an executive and I had a fixed salary and I was going to start on my own and, find my own way in the world. This was before I decided I was going to start a company and sell my house and all of that. But I went on a final holiday before I left the company because I hadn't taken any holidays. In the 3 years I was with them, I was always working. I never took any holiday time. So I took my last weeks of holiday. I went to Brazil to a friend's house. And on the way back from Brazil, I had these terrible sores on the side of my mouth. They were so, they were, it was like open flesh. I'd never had anything similar. And I understood as I got back that uh, coming back to a life where I was going to stop having the safety of a fixed income every month as a salary and go out into the world on my own was terrorizing to me. I was terrified, but I did it. Yeah. And so I could have stayed in that company and pushed back the need, the want, the wish inside of me that was saying, I need to go out and find my own way because in every company I worked in for the 10 years that I was an executive, first I worked in a small Spanish consulting company. First I worked I was in DHL doing part-time when I was finishing my career. Then I worked in a small Spanish company. Then I was outsourced to Deloitte, and with Deloitte, I worked for 4 years. And then I worked for another 3 years in a French retail company called Leroy Merlin. And in all of these experiences, I always became terribly frustrated because I would kill myself working, and I had always got very good grades. I knew I was very smart. And I did things the best way I knew how to do things. And then I never got recognized or compensated or promoted even. I got the opposite. I got the same treatment I had got at home my entire life. So I was trapped in this dynamic where I went to different companies. In Deloitte, I worked in 3 different offices. I worked in Madrid, I worked in Paris, I worked in San Francisco. Um, and maybe I worked somewhere else too, but those were like the 3 big. I kept looking for new projects, new locations, new bosses, new ways to find a way out of that dynamic where I worked myself silly and got no recognition or compensation. Somebody else got recognition or compensation, and none of what I had done was appreciated. And I couldn't find my way out of it. So leaving and starting my own business as an independent coach was a new way out. I was looking for a place, was a new repetition where I was trying to get away from injustice, from unjust systems, from false meritocracies that weren't really about merit. They were about who's friends with who and who's son-in-law to somebody else, and all of these things that happen in large companies where there's a lot of mediocrity protecting each other, protecting the system. Yeah. And what happened is I started my own company and I repeated the same dynamic. I would never have done that voluntarily. Yeah. So repeating the dynamic is what allowed me to understand that I was repeating that the other driver, that other intelligence inside of me was repeating that dynamic because it was traumatized. And there was trauma to be solved there. Yeah. So timing is very long. It requires repetition. So you repeat patterns and you repeat them in every area of your life. You're repeating patterns. It takes you a long time to identify the pattern and to see it. Yeah. And you're not free to stop repeating the pattern. In reality, I had a choice to stay inside multinational companies where I had safety, but I wasn't being treated. I wasn't getting the fair or just or the satisfactory compensation and recognition to all of the work I was putting in. And I could have stayed there for more time, but I would have become increasingly desperate and angry and frustrated with a system that it wasn't working for me. It was working against me. It was turning me into a slave. I was basically a slave to all of these incompetent people who were using my work or my talent or my ideas to make their own money or their own careers. Yeah. I was slaving it out to everybody. And then I went out, I started my own company and I slaved it out to all of my employees, shareholders, and 50 consultants that we had who we trained and who we invested in to get them into large projects. And it was just exhausting. So when I was just so exhausted and so completely out of cash and completely out of capacity to get more debt, because if I had been able to leverage anything I had to get into more debt, I would have done it to keep going because I couldn't see the pattern happening. Yeah. So this kind of illustrates the way our trauma drives our business performance, drives our career in ways we would never have chosen. Yeah. Um, mm, 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 mm. And that shows us another interesting thing. And I want to leave you with that last idea because I don't want to make this video too long. And I've touched most of the things I wanted to talk about today. I read today a fascinating story on LinkedIn. Somebody posted about how all of the animals and the ecosystems in Chernobyl are thriving. And the article started with a title that said that radioactivity was less lethal to the ecosystems than humans were. It was said the other way around. It sounded better. Yeah, but humanity is more toxic than radiation is. And they were describing how there were lots of huge mammals living there and how all the plants were doing really well. And it's all amazing. And the interesting thing is that all of the animals living in the area of Chernobyl, where the nuclear accident happened, in case you're very young and you don't remember what happened at Chernobyl, is a nuclear reactor exploded. There's a great series on HBO. It's a great series about what happened at Chernobyl. And all the humans got out of there and they left all of their dogs behind. So there's lots of dogs walking around Chernobyl. And so the whole exclusion zone is judged to be too radioactive for humans to live there. So it's become ripe and ready for raw nature to live there. And all of the species who are living in that exclusion zone have developed amazing properties, biological properties, because their immune systems are constantly fighting against the radiation. So frogs aren't green, they're black because their melatonin protects them. And I can't remember the list of amazing qualities that all of these animals have developed. Birds replicate a lot faster than normal birds. And it was just amazing if you look for the story. And what does that tell us? What does it tell us? And there's a lot of scientific research that's looked into immune systems. And I remember another story from a book, a very interesting book called Scared Sick. It's a bit old now because it must be 10 or 15 years old, but scientists put together all of the research that connected childhood adversity with sickness in later in life. And one of the stories that this woman tells in the book, it's called Scared Sick. Hmm? Is there's a village in that's sitting on the frontier between Sweden and Norway. And in one of those, I think it's those two countries, it's up in the three countries. And so when they finally decided the way that they were going to lay out the line that separated both countries, the line went through a population of people. And so part of that population continued to be very rural and continued to have farms and animals and grow cows, and all of the babies were rolling around in muck and exposed to all of those animals, germs, etc. And the other side of the population became urban populations. And so all of the children were stuck in clean homes with no germs, and everything was spick and span. And what they found in the study is that the babies who grew up in the farms and with all of the muck and all of the animals had better immune systems than the babies that grew up with no exposure to no germs. When I was small, and even when I was 20 years old, people were constantly boiling water and making sure that they didn't give their babies any germs of any kind. And it was kind of obsessive to avoid all kinds of germs with the babies. And since then, people have stopped boiling water all the time because it's not that good for babies. Babies need to be exposed. We've learned you need to be exposed to germs in order to grow the muscle of your immune system so that it's strong and it can face the kinds of COVIDs and sicknesses that we come across every day, right? So you need an obstacle to grow a muscle. You need an obstacle to grow a flexible, strong, adaptable immune system. Yeah. The animals of Chernobyl are super versions of their species because they're living with a huge obstacle, which is the radiation that could kill them. Yeah. I'm sure they have problems too, because nothing is free. Yeah. Um, but our radiation is our trauma. Our super obstacle that makes us strong, even when we might look like a poor fentanyl addict, so somebody who's looking at us, judging us from the outside in a passing car from a rich BMW or super Tesla, super rich condominium, blah, 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 looking down and, oh, these poor addicts, they're rolling around in fentanyl and they look like zombies on the streets. Um, their whole, their entire life is about uh, opposing the obstacle of their trauma. Even there, they're repeating a pattern of falling into addiction and escaping, and it's horrible, and their lives are completely torn apart. But they're doing it because they're part of a whole family story of trying to overcome trauma. Sometimes the addict in the family is carrying the greatest load of family trauma. Maybe the addict in the family will not make it, will live on the street and maybe die on the street. But that is part of a bigger story, the family story of resolving trauma. And what that addict carried and maybe fell into or was not strong enough to resist, he at least has worked through it so that the load that comes into nephews or children or anybody in the next generations, the load of trauma that they inherit is smaller. Yeah. So, our trauma is not a drama and something that we need, it's not a tragedy. It is. For a time, it just, I mean, I suffered so much with all of the trauma that I was carrying. And then, I had been sexually abused, and then I had been in a toxic environment at home, and then I had lost a twin brother who was in the womb with me, and it died, and that's when you're a solitary twin, you have a whole lot of other trauma to work with. And then my mother never wanted me to start with, and she had this kind of mental stuff going on, a little bit of mental sickness where she was constantly trying to get rid of me without anybody noticing. So I was always getting these double messages, like she was trying to kill me or trying to erase me from existence by turning me into something else. And that was part of that whole toxic dynamic we had at home where I was everybody's slave. And I said, they're all good people. No, it's nobody's fault. Trauma is not anybody's fault. Trauma is something we fall into, we experience in life. We weren't looking for it. Not even as perpetrators, we weren't really looking for it. It happened, and we saw ourselves do something that we would not have chosen had we had the liberty or the freedom to choose. But it happened, and now we have to live with the consequences. Yeah. And in a sense, everybody's a victim to trauma, both the people who suffer the trauma, but also the people who inflict the trauma. They're often the victims of other trauma stories behind them. And that is why this whole thing of working with trauma is a very long path, but it's a purpose. It's a purpose of self. The Spanish word is coming to me instead of self-improvement, of becoming more than you were before, of absorbing the huge life-changing hit that trauma is, both as a victim and as a perpetrator, and working your way through that until you can leave it behind you. And you have resolved trauma when you can look back at those events without blaming anybody, when you are at total peace with those events, and when you recognize and accept and can, you feel it with all of your body that those traumas made you a better person. When you reach there is when you've resolved the trauma, and that is when you're really ready to make an impact on the world. So the self-help coaches and self-help therapists and all of the self-help predators out there trying to sell your stuff, they're still working through your trauma. That's why they're acting as predators, because they're repeating a fight or flight response. They need money, they need clients, they need, like addicts, they need, because they're escaping their own pain. Yeah, we've all done that. We've all been there. Yeah. And that is why they can't give you something they don't even know how it feels or what it looks like, because they're still stuck in the maze or the labyrinth of all of the trauma that they need to resolve before they can truly be helpers, yeah, in the world. So I hope you get something useful out of all of this. YouTube has told me that they are now going to start putting automatic translation into all the videos, which for me is good news, because that way you can find me and listen to me in your own language. I don't know what I will sound like, and I will probably have a very strange accent I would never recognize. But I'm happy that my voice and my experience and my story can reach more people. And that's what AI and social networks are good for. That's what they're helping us to achieve. Then they're also bringing a lot of challenges, and they're going to put a lot of us into very complicated situations where we will repeat um, the original trauma situation. And because we're living through it, we will be able to connect to the hidden feelings that are frozen inside of us and start to bring them out and allow them to flow through us. Yesterday, I did a short video saying that the way to solve trauma, the how to solve trauma, is stop trying to fix it. Sit with it, accept it, and allow yourself to feel it. And there is a whole life of learning in that simple idea, but it's an idea worth putting forward and thinking about. I will leave you with that. Have a great day. Bye.